In this video, I'm talking with Cornelius Gould of Angry Audio, who, Angry Audio, is our sponsor for today's video. Now, Corney has been around the industry for a long, long time, and he's had his hands in a lot of different audio processors, ones that you have probably heard on your local radio station. So, I am very honored to have him on the channel, and I'm very honored to be able to have a conversation with him. So, without further ado, here is Cornelius Gould. Well, thank you for joining me in this discussion about audio processing. And
thanks for having me.
I just have a few questions, and we can go as long or as little as you would like to, or as deep as you would like to go into some of these.
Okay.
But kind of starting off more about you, how long have you been working with audio processing?
Oh, man. The first processor that I built actually was when I was about 16 or 17 in that realm. And the reason I built it, was I was running my little pirate station in, my mom's basement. And one of the things I noticed is that everybody else sounded more exciting than I did. And, there's just something going on. Is this a different version of the music they're playing than I am, or what? And it was a big mystery until one of my friends, his stepdad, mentioned that he was hearing us playing because I brought my little transmitter to their house. We were playing DJ in his bedroom at the time. So then he came, you know what you need? You need an audio processor. And then once he said that, the lights went up. It's like, I bet that's the missing piece. And I started grilling him for what it was about. And he goes, I don't know much about it. My friend's a DJ and I saw one, but it splits the audio into like 3 bands and then does stuff and puts it back together and makes it sound louder than it really is. And I was like, oh, that's the missing piece. And so I wondered how much does one of these things cost? And looked around in magazines in the library and all that. And I found an ad for an audio processor. And this is back in the mid 80s or so. It was like $8,000 for, a processor that had all the stuff. I think it was an Orban with an XT2, I think, in the advertisement. And then at that point, it's like, oh, well, how do you build one of these things? So that's kind of where I went down that road. And, eventually I had something that made me sound bigger and exciting and louder. And it kind of stuck to the point where, I went into being a broadcast engineer and I became the audio processing guy, to adjust the processing on the stations, in addition to all the other stuff. And as you know, being a broadcast engineer, we all take care of the same things, but different folks have different specialties. Some people get really good at transmitters. Some people get really good at antennas. And I got really good at audio processing. So that was my particular specialty. So,
nice.
A little in a nutshell there.
Well, it's always good to have that specialty, because then there aren't that many people doing that.
Yes.
So, it being your specialty, do you have let me rephrase that. What is your philosophy when it comes down to audio processing? Because it could be different for, Fred over here than it would be for you,
Let's see here. My biggest thing is to try not to trash up my audio too much, and with the goals. So one of the things that I never really fully pursued like other folks did was being the absolute loudest station on the dial. I was content to be the next loudest station on the dial, because my theory was, well, when they get fatigued at that guy, we're going to sound a little bit easier to listen to for them. And so, and that seemed to work for me. I never really tried to slug it out, with being the square wave empire station. So that's one thing is, I like to adjust processing, but I don't like to adjust it to the point where people are fatigued or being driven away by it or annoyed by anything that's going on. So that's my number one thing is, try not to do any harm to stuff. So that's in general when I walk up and adjust the station. And in my, time working with the on-air audio processors that I've designed, namely back in my day when I was with the Omnia, with the Omnia 11, there were a lot of folks who would, I would adjust things to how they wanted to sound. I would listen to them with their, the PDs, usually the program directors, and give them the sound they want. And then they'll say, so what would you do if you were on this station? You probably wouldn't like what I would do. What do you mean? And they had a whole different picture. And it's like, yeah, I think what you have would sound pretty good. I don't think you would like it in this market, but I would like. So every now and then somebody would have me try it. And I was like, well, here's a preset that I like. And they go, yeah, I don't like that. Put the other one back on. Say, yeah, I told you. So, because it's usually not loud enough and it's not, whatever, and, bombastic enough or whatever. So as far as when it comes to my designs, like what I'm doing these days with the Chameleon, there are philosophies behind it, but a lot of it was me realizing, when I was doing this work with other audio processors and designing under the different company at the time, that everything works great. And I was working within the, like say at Omnia, I work within the parameters of the Omnia philosophy and things like that. And it was cool and fun. But then it wasn't, and also when I was in radio working with other audio processors, like whether it's an Orban or whatever, you would get familiar with their philosophies and how things go. And at a point, it was like, well, the stuff I had, I didn't know what the Orbans did or what the philosophies were or anything else when I was first getting into this. I just wanted something to make me sound like, like a big station on my little pirate thing. So I came up with my own design that did that. And basically it was just based on, hey, here's a sound I want to achieve. I've got a pile of parts here. I got to make these things make this sound I want. So I would just kind of visualize what I need to do to make that happen. But along the way, I just realized that I had a formula and that, that's just not in other boxes because, it's not part of the established way you do it. So that's what drove my work with coming up with the Chameleons and all that. They're all kind of derived from that early work and things I've done, up until the point I went to work into audio processing design professionally.
I will say I do like the Chameleon. Was it last year when you guys had the sale on the software, the C6 software?
Yes.
I ended up buying it. So I run all of that's like my last step of the audio for my YouTube videos is I'll run it through that, through one of the presets and,
oh, nice.
It kind of levels things out. And so, yeah, just wanted to let you know I enjoy it. I like it. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. There, and I am finishing up a big update for the C6 as well. So that's keep an eye out for that.
Very good, very good. As you were going through the design process in general in your career of different products, were there any, or I guess kind of what was the big challenge to overcome with processing in general? I mean, I know there's a lot of different pieces.
Yes.
But was there something that was just like, okay, hang on, how do we solve this weird big problem? There's
a lot of that in so many different areas. Probably the biggest thing that I run into these days is that this is one of these things where if you were to look on a graph and you have the one you draw a line going horizontal, and as you get to the right, it's like how to top yourself. So the line just becomes exponentially steeper every time you go to make something better because it's like everything becomes more exact, like everything. You're down to quarters of a dB here and something over there, and if it's not on, then you slip behind what you did before. So it's a lot of it's a tight balancing act, and it gets harder and harder as you go along to make things even better. Like for instance, like the one thing where I don't know if you can get any better than what it is loudness now. I mean, it's like, I think everybody's wrung out just about everything they can to make a square wave sound like it's not a square wave, but louder now.
Yeah.
And you can tell with, as the audio processing evolves and the loudness level goes up and up, you find that cliff between sounds good, sounds bad becomes sharper and sharper. He's like, okay, if I go beyond this line, it just falls apart. Below this line, it sounds good. And we're down to that point with loudness where you're just kind of making that little round part on the edge of that square a little bit squarer, And so I don't know if, so with that, it's like, I don't think we can get any louder. You can try to get a little more margin between when it falls apart and when it sounds okay. So that's one area that's, it'll be interesting to see if anybody breaks that wall. But there's a lot of other things like that, in various areas in processing. What else? And for me, one of the things I try to go for, or take advantage of, I should say, in my designs is that I came up with designs where they were kind of self-tuning as they work, and the hardest part was getting the designs in analog to translate into DSP to do all this self-tuning. And I tried to apply that when I was working on the Omni 11, and it has sort of that range there, but I didn't have it all kind of figured out how to translate that stuff from the analog into DSP, because a lot of it is just, a lot of the way the analog stuff worked, you just needed way higher sample rate than you have available to you to do that. And if you do use a higher sample rate, then you take away from some other aspect you need for performance, say like a clipper or whatever. So it's a matter of figuring out how to get all this stuff to run inside the constraints of the digital world,
Yeah.
So that was the other challenge for me that kind of falls along what you're saying, but it doesn't quite relate to any other audio processor because it's just something unique to what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of that, you get close and, oh no, it just fell off the cliff there. And you have to kind of look around and dig around and research and figure out, okay, oh, I see here. Okay. We kind of went over the line over here and, kind of make adjustments. So it's a lot of that. I don't know if it makes sense. Feel free to ask me questions.
It does. And I kind of want to follow up with that is when I had done an interview with Bill Harland at ERI about antennas. And I'd asked him, basically this question is, okay, what's the next big thing? What's the really cool thing? And he's like, honestly, we've hit the limit of physics. So we're just experimenting with materials now.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of the same thing is, what's the next big thing with audio processing? I mean, like you said, you can only go so loud and everything else is just little tiny adjustments from, here on. But what's like the next quantum leap, if you will, of audio processing?
I think a lot of it's going to depend on the imagination of the various developers out there. I think one of the most recent advances in processing is the use of FFT style clippers like you'd see in Stereo Tool or the Omnia 9 or whatever. So that was a pretty cool advancement and kind of almost out of the box kind of solution to that problem. I don't know if there's any other things that they are thinking about in that realm. One of the things I should back up and say when I'm talking about this, like the clipper stuff in processing clipping, that's one of those things that didn't really hold much interest to me. So I just kind of step back and watch and kind of smile when I see something cool and unique. So I was left the clipper side to some other thing. And so when I was with Omnia, that was nice to have Frank there with his whole focus on clipping. So I just let him make the awesome clippers, and I just make an awesome front end for it, or as best I can, So when I talk about the clipping stuff, I would say it's kind of cool, and I appreciate what they came up with. What they're thinking about, I don't know. Where they can take it from there, I'm not quite sure, but it's kind of cool to watch. On my end, when it comes to dynamics, what I've been pushing in my designs, and as you've probably experienced with using the processing, is since the algorithms are all self-tuning and can go slow to fast or whatever, and they all do that in real time in relation to the music that's playing, I can break out a really simple set of controls that allow you to get a pretty wide range of sounds out of the box without having to go in and adjust parameters that have to do with every single band that's in the processor. And, so for me, that's kind of the big thing, is just to kind of make it so you can just dial it, set it, forget it, and move on to something else, because that's kind of the world we're all in now. The time to spend weeks and weeks and weeks figuring out get this one band to sound right just isn't there for anybody anymore. And most people who would like a processor probably don't really understand it enough to really know what to do with all those controls. And they're likely somebody who would spend a bunch of money for somebody else to make a preset for them. So I try to make it so that you can be your own expert, if you will. So people who like to set it and forget it and get a great sound and move on, they love it. I think the people that have a hard time wrapping their head around it are the processing experts who understand a lot about what goes on in an audio processor, and they're just frustrated because just give me the attack and releases for these. It's like, well, there aren't any. So
right, yeah, that's all kind of So your focus and your career has kind of been focused on radio processing, right?
It's kind of what was convenient at the time. Really, when streaming came out, that was really my big thing that I really liked, and I was been involved with streaming audio for delivery pretty much since before it was a thing. I mean, I kind of fell into it with a friend of mine where they were playing around with this service that was meant to be like a internet walkie-talkie. You key down and say something, and somebody else would key down and reply. And there was a few people who would just like go into permanent key down mode and play music and play DJ over it. So there was enough of folks, and I got into that as well. And the sound quality was like worse than an AM radio station. But at this point, once I was doing that, I started playing around with the processing to try to make it sound a little bit better. And a little bit better. And then eventually the company kind of changed everything around and just turned it into make your own radio station now, because so many people were doing that. So that's kind of how far back I go into that. And so I kind of fell into that and got, pretty good at, as the codecs changed over the years, figuring out ways to kind of massage the audio to sound the best through the codecs. And my lady in the box here thought I was talking to, it just went off. And so that's kind of like where I have been. And broadcasting was kind of like I didn't really pay much attention to it because it was like the players were already established in that field, and it was what it was at the time. And it really wasn't until when I got into DSP and had a moment to be in the R&D with Omnia that kind of pulled me into the broadcast space with processing, But I've always stayed with the streaming side, which is why when I started doing my processing work at Angry Audio, all of our products have been streaming products, because it's just, I had all these great ideas that the Chameleon can do. They can be applied to the streaming. And that's kind of where I went full board. So kind of answered your question there in the end.
Yeah. Have you ever had an audio issue that just made you upset? But don't worry, because one of the sponsors for today's video has you covered. Angry Audio offers all sorts of gadgets and gizmos, from headphone disconnectors to prevent you from ripping the headphone jack right out of the console, to mic processors and software to make your streams sound amazing. I want to focus on something specific: the Angry Audio Rave. It's their powerful yet affordable audio console built for radio stations just like yours. The Rave has 8 stereo line inputs, up to 4 microphone inputs, 2 output mix buses, 2 mix minus outputs, a monitor feed for your control room, and so much more. The Rave is made of anodized aluminum, silky smooth faders, and tally outputs for your on-air light. Get major market quality at small market prices. Learn more at angryaudio.com. Thank you, Angry Audio, for sponsoring this video. Is the way you go about processing streaming different than FM? Like,
yes,
a big difference, a slight difference? Like what are you looking at in the differences, or what are the differences in a way?
You have to, one of the things, if you're kind of going for a loudness thing, you have to kind of be careful with how you go about loudness for streaming. Because when you're going through a lossy codec, it's looking for, which is what most of the internet streaming services are. And for folks who don't know what a lossy codec means, is that, let's just say you're talking about a typical 128 kilobit stream, which is what a lot of hobbyists gravitate towards. So when you're doing 128 kilobit streams, you're throwing away about 90% of the audio data to get it to even work at that bit rate. So there's a lot that's missing, and the codec does its best to try to cover up the fact that 90% of the audio is gone. So that's for starters. And what you want to do is you want to help the codec along with that job. So if you feed it with traditional processing and all that, then you end up with all these weird sounds and artifacts that sound like you're underwater, or like somebody's jingling their keys behind in the background when there's no key sounds there in the source, and all kinds of oddities like that in there. So, and when you're presenting a codec with audio that it has a hard time figuring out what to remove, that's when you get all these little artifacts in there. So the big thing to do is just to keep the audio sounding kind of smooth-like. Clipping is a no-no, and most people who use a broadcast processor for streaming have to be really careful about that loudness clipper, because the more you crank into that, the harder it becomes for the codec to figure out what to do, because the clipping just ends up spreading that audio information farther out on the frequency spectrum than it really is in real life. So that just makes it harder. And the codec is always looking for something it can remove because it's hidden by something in the foreground. So it's removing background things. And when you use clipping, it just kind of clutters up the background of the audio, so to speak. So there's very little for it to remove. So it tries its best to try to encode everything it's hearing, and then it just creates these artifacts as a result. So that's kind of like a long explanation for folks who don't quite know, when we're talking about lossy codecs, what's going on. So the number one thing is just that I found that if you can make it so that it sounds smooth and pleasant to the ear, that seems to translate well for the codec. And then I play other games with codec conditioning and things like that, where the Chameleon helps along that process by trying to remove some things in the audio that it sees before it even sends it to the codec to help the codec along.
Well, you kind of preemptively answered my next question, which was why would somebody want to use a paid product, a box, a software, instead of using something like FFmpeg, which is like open and free?
Well, most of the software, that streaming software out there, whether you pay for it or not, it's all built around FFmpeg one way or another. So it's just a matter of what the feature set is. Like FFmpeg itself is it's not really a user-friendly, user-facing thing. It's all command line stuff. So people build this GUI around it all to, make it easy for the end user to use. GUI meaning the controls that you adjust on the screens and all that when you start up the program. And some of the paid products out there will allow you to use things like a Chameleon, like with the VST, or some other program you want to use that's a VNT, and you can insert that in between your studio or computer audio and the coder meant for the listeners to hear. So those are some of the advantages you get with the paid products that you don't get with the free ones typically.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Because I can hear it now. Well, I can do that for free with blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, sure, but you're missing out on X, Y, and Z type of thing. So
yes. Okay. And a lot of the free programs don't necessarily do a really good job at filtering out frequencies that you should not be sending to the codec in the first place. So you may end up where, you might end up with fuzzy sounding treble and stuff like that because you're not preconditioning it, and they didn't bother to put any preconditioning in because it's free. Why are they going to put that much work into it? Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just, you kind of, listening to everything you're saying, it's just, there's so much that goes into audio processing. It's more than, hey, let me just run it through a compressor, or let me run it through a limiter. And it just kind of goes to show that this little magic box that most stations, okay, we put it in for the FM, or we put it in for the streaming, and it does its magic.
Yes.
There's so much more to it. And I know I've talked to a lot of smaller stations, and they're like, well, I don't know if I can afford a new blah, 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 blah. I'll just go on eBay and find a X, Y, and Z. Okay, sure. But there's a reason why it costs a lot of money, because there's a lot of development in there to make you sound good.
Yes. And you're only going to sell so many of these boxes. So, you got to recoup it somehow. So that's another reason why some of the boxes end up being as expensive as they are. It's a lot of time and energy goes in.
Right. And it's a limited market.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Indeed.
Well, I do have to say, I do appreciate everything you guys at Angry Audio have done with your audio processing. I got to play with the Smooth and the Rebel.
I'm talking to you on a Smooth.
But I could tell it sounds good.
Thank you.
I brought it in, hooked it up, just didn't do anything to it, just hooked it up and went, wow, this is nice. And then, okay, now time to start messing with it. Okay, I see where I can really go wrong here. Okay, let me back it off.
Yes.
No, I was very impressed with how well it sounded, just boom, out of the box. And I have to tell you that. It was great.
Thank you. I hear that from a bunch of folks, and that makes me smile, because that was a concern that Catfish and I had with any of the products that we sell. The user experience has got to start off, right, from the beginning. So that's nice to hear.
I think the biggest thing is just, okay, what's my input? Adjust my input to the right level, and then after that, it just
the big thing with all the our mic processors is to get the preamp right in the right zone. That's the important part, because everything is keyed on the preamp being right in its happy zone.
Spot.
And if you get that in the happy space, everything else falls into place. So so that's the key. And go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and your C level, absolutely love it.
Thank you.
Again, it's also one of those things of you just audio in, audio out, and it just works.
That's the idea. It tries to be as transparent as possible, unless you want to hear it, and then you can crank it into full,
Yeah.
dense mode. Works for most things. I would say when people get that, if they're using it with a newer box, like an 11 or something like that, that the highest setting is probably going to be too much. I do know, being that I developed both of them, if you run at the highest density, you can get the 11 to kind of like not be happy because it's got its own versions of the smart stuff on the AGCs, and having the C level too high could confuse it a little bit. So if you're using it with a newer box, just go with medium or slow and you'll be fine.
Nice.
Older boxes, you can go ahead, like if you had it in front of an 8100, yeah, you can go ahead and crank it all the way up on that if you want it. It's doesn't have, quite the touchiness that you would have when you have something trying to figure out what to do with the audio as you're presenting it with it.
Right.
So
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Honestly, that's the fun part there. But go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll let you go ahead.
So the way that we're using it, kind of sidestepping here into my fanboyish. So my day job is with Link Up Communications. We do content distribution.
Okay.
And so people will send us their radio shows or stuff, and we'll ship it out by satellite streaming on XDS. So we basically take all these different talk shows, and, show A might think it's a great idea to run their levels averaging at -14.
Yes.
And then their commercials at -30. Just
like
random things like that. And then the next show will be, -24 or so. Having this box allows us to kind of give this consistency to our end users of like, okay, obviously don't send it to us distorted, but
right.
quieter, louder, allows us to even it out and give you a better product on the end without cranking on it too much.
The nice thing about the C level for content distribution is that it's the default mode that it's designed to run in is at a -24 LUFS reference level, which is perfect for over the satellites and any other kind of content distribution because it's at that standard, LUFS level. You get people that'll ask, why do I need LUFS for my broadcast? And it's like, well, you don't really, but it's nice to have a consistent, loudness base going into your on-air box because that solves a lot of issues you have. And I will point out, though, since we're on the C level, there's one thing that confuses people is when they're looking at their input meters on their processor that's following the C level, usually those meters are kind of peak reading. So with that in mind, if your source content is like really dense, like a really smashed up song where you open up an audition and it's just a brick, when C level will normalize it to -24, a peak reading set of meters are going to look like it's really low. And you're going, I'm getting inconsistent levels. Like, well, there's no peaks in that song. It brought it down to the point where it sounded as loud as the song with peaks. But, so to the ear and to the processor, it's all the same. But a peak reading meter, you'll see that something's missing. Yeah, all the peaks that the record company shaved off. So I would just point that out because just in case we inspire people to try a C level, that kind of confuses some folks at first because they don't really realize what's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah. And even then on the opposite side, when you're doing something that is really peaky, like speech, things like that it's kind of the opposite. You'll have a lot of peaks.
Yes.
But your average level is going to be,
Yes. Yeah, because what's important is what's in the middle there. And
right.
And the C level if we're worried about what happens in the peaks, the C level does have a look-ahead limiter on it that'll, knock the peaks down. So internally, it's set for a -1 dB true peak. So it'll never be any higher than -1 dB. So you don't have to worry about overloading some digital source down the stream.
Nice. I have a lot of people on this channel who are IT people that found themselves, hey, guess what? You're now the engineer. Or people that have just come in and have an interest in it. And they want to learn more about audio processing. What suggestions do you have for them? What advice do you want to give them? People that are just interested in it. What do I do now?
The one thing that people really enjoyed, and something I wrote, maybe 15 or more years ago, I wrote a series of articles for a radio guide that was about processing, and I just did a really deep dive into what's going on in the boxes and kind of built up from there. Barry Michigan, who was the editor then, and a friend of mine, he's been bugging me for years to revive that in some way because so many people liked it. So if you can find those, that would be a good spot to start with. Maybe I'll figure out a convenient way to post that stuff somewhere. Or maybe I could talk to Barry and can post it too, if he didn't already do that. So there's that if you could dig around for it. Another thing to do is if you find a manual for, say, like an Orban 8100 processor, and read through that, there's a lot that goes on in there. And all the basics of things you need to know would be talked about in one way or another in there by Bob Orban. So that's another good source. And then the other thing that I would say, that should give you all the book knowledge you need anyway. But the big thing is just to play, because find a box. It doesn't even have to start off being an audio processor. It could be a microphone processor. It can be an old discarded DBX 286 or something, or a DBX compressor or something. And then that's where you can just kind of play around and get a feel for what these controls do. And then from there, the Google is like a great friend there. So it's if you're stuck with a control and you want to know exactly what's going on with this control named whatever, you can always search from there and get answers from people that are the experts out there. And you may even run across things that I've posted here and there. And then you'll get a better idea of that control at least. And you can play around a little bit and start to learn the art of it all. Because there's the science and then there's the art part of it. And that's kind of a thing that I think that's kind of seems to be unique to me, in that I have two parts of me. There's the technical guy that does all the schematics and the DSP work, but there's a program director in my head too, because I run my internet stations now where I'm do music format on there. So there's a program director part of me. And so the program director part of me has all the same desires that any other program director would have, except I would battle to the other half of me. Doesn't sound like one. It needs to be more beefed up. It needs to be. So there's a part of me that balances the art and the science too. So that's kind of fun. But that's one way you can learn that too. In your own way, you can learn the art and the science. And the art is only learned by playing with it. The science you can read about. And so the more you learn about the two and how to blend them, I think the better you'll get with processing.
Nice. Well, thank you again for taking, the 40 or so minutes that we've been talking.
Oh, no problem.
I do appreciate it. And, I think the audience for this channel, don't necessarily know who these big players are, like you and some of the others who have done so much work with audio processing and how radio sounds today, kind of shaped us and pointed us in a certain direction. So, it's kind of good for them to kind of, okay, this is the person behind, the blah, 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 and the this and that.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's a good thing. And there's definitely great players to learn from. I've been fortunate enough to run into, become friends and work with Frank, Frank Fody, who gave me the opportunity to work with him on the 11. So that was fun and always will be remember all the great times with that. Steve Church he was the one that discovered me first, who was the owner of Telos before he passed away. So he, hooked us up together. So I'm always grateful for that. And all the people I've met since then, like the Greg Ogonowskis and even Barry and all those folks. So it's been a fun ride. So thought I'd take a moment to,
Absolutely.
show my appreciation for the people who've helped me along or inspired me as well.
Thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate it. And while you're here, please do me a favor. Check out some of the other videos that are on this channel. I have videos about all kinds of different things. Antennas, towers, EAS. I think I did do one on audio processing. All kinds of different things. So while you're here, check out some of the other videos. And if you're interested in transmitter site tours, seeing what it's like at the top of the mountains, where those towers are, I have a whole playlist on transmitter site tours, as well as studio site tours, so you can kind of see the behind the scenes of a radio station. So with that, thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning.